About a minute. Give it a minute while folks will come on to start. It takes about a minute to get everybody on. Go ahead, Liz. You can go ahead and start.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I am Liz Turpak, Senior Policy and Partnerships Advisor at the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA. Along with NOAA, these dialogues are being sponsored by the Marine Technology Society and the Global Ocean Observation System, GOOS. We sincerely appreciate you joining this third in a series of dialogues with industry to discuss today user-driven ocean information, downstream services, and growing the market through impact and increasing the demand. Slide 2, please. The ocean or blue economy has been well documented. OECD's report predicted the ocean economy will reach $3 trillion by 2030. And in June of 22, the United States Department of Commerce found that the American blue economy contributed about $361 billion of the nation's gross domestic product across 10 sectors, representing businesses dependent on the nation's oceans, coast, and Great Lakes. Also, we are seeing a growth in businesses that are either producing ocean observation platforms, providing ocean observing as a mission or service, and using ocean information to provide a product for sale. This has been defined as the ocean enterprise, and this sector is growing. NOAA, IU's Ocean Enterprise Study states that the value of this enterprise, with over 814 companies, is $8 billion annually, which is a significant growth from the same study 5 years previously. Canada and the United Kingdom have also conducted similar ocean enterprise studies, and their results also show an upward trend. Beyond the 2 bullets shown here, this translates to a growing demand for ocean information, as well as a growing pool of partners that can meet this demand. This change in the paradigm is what we are here today to talk about. Slide 3, please. Applying the value chain approach to these dialogues allows us to explore how ocean observations are converted through a wide range of interactions, transformations, and service delivery mechanisms into products that have value to decision makers and business leaders. The diagram you see here combines the ocean information value chain and the segments of the ocean observing enterprise. It shows that the partners in the value chain interconnect to deliver information to end users, who in turn derive socioeconomic and economic benefits from these information products. Private and public organizations, as well as public-private partnerships on a local, national, regional, and global level can contribute to any number of these elements. This reinforces this concept that ocean observing networks in the future will be multi-sectoral. Today, we are focused on the right-hand side of the value chain, the intermediaries. The Ocean Enterprise Study defines intermediaries as public and private organizations that add value to public and private ocean data and information by tailoring it to meet specific end user needs. Or as the European Union states, the Earth observation downstream services industry is a cutting edge and fast moving sector for which innovation is key to providing new products and services. We appreciate that businesses represented at our dialogue today likely categorize themselves in multi-components along this value chain. However, we are looking for the dialogues to build upon each other. And so we do get to discuss all of the elements of this diagram. Today's session will touch on the 2 overarching topics you see on the screen. Slide 4, please. The planning team has tried to craft these dialogues differently, and instead of a single panel or session, we have spent quite a bit of time curating 4 dialogues that will build on each other. We're looking forward to hearing from you on actionable recommendations, and our moderator will continue to push you in that direction. We also wanted to ensure a broad representation from the public, private, and academic sectors in disciplines ranging from technologists to economists, from lawyers to venture capitalists. So thank you again for allocating your time and sharing your expertise. Slide 5, please. I'm very pleased to introduce our facilitator, Chris. You see his bio on the screen, but it also is important to note that Chris began his career in ocean observing. He was the founding director of the Pacific Island Ocean Observation System, or PAC-IOS, one of the 11 regional associations of the U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System. He also participated on the national stage as a member of the IOS Federal Advisory Committee. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Liz. I appreciate the introduction. Good morning, everybody. Good evening. It's a pleasure to join you all for this third dialogue in our series, and I look forward to a robust and collegial discussion today. For our invited participants, I ask you to keep your video on during the discussion, and I invite you to use the raise hand feature within Zoom so I can call on you to share your thoughts with the group. In some cases, I may direct a question at a particular participant or group of participants. And in the interest of keeping the discussion moving, I may shift to a new question before I've been able to call on everyone who raises their hand. Please use the Q&A box on your screen so you can see the comments and questions that come in from our audience. And please layer in your own comments to what has been submitted. Our invited participants will not be able to initiate your own thread in the Q&A, but you can raise any questions verbally you have for the group. Just raise your hand. In the interest of time, I'm not going to introduce our invited participants. Instead, please tell folks your name, your role in your organization when you speak for the first time. For our audience participants, please listen to the conversation and submit written comments in the Q&A for everyone to see. You can also layer in feedback to the questions or comments posted by everybody else. During the last 30 minutes of our session today, we'll invite everyone to participate in open discussion. For everybody, please keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking. As Liz mentioned, our conversation today is divided into 2 sessions. We've set aside about 45 minutes for questions and discussion in each, with a short break in between. And please note that this session, the Q&A, and the chat are all being recorded and will be made publicly available in the coming weeks. The content of the session report, though, will not include attribution to the comments or questions of any participant. So with that, let's get started. Our first session is focused on downstream service delivery. And underpinning this session is the reality that the growth in ocean observing data being produced globally does not seamlessly translate to the creation of value-added products and services by downstream service providers at the spatial scales, timeliness, and accessibility levels needed by all decision makers in the market. So if the first question, what role does and should industry play in developing and distributing decision-making tools? Who wants to go first? Kelly, and then Joseph.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Nee. I'm the Executive Director of the RPS Ocean Science Division. We're headquartered here in Rhode Island. We've played a role sort of between government and industry for many years in delivering meteorological and ocean data to industry, publicly available data to industry through concepts like our environmental data server, which ingests publicly available data, homogenizes it, and reserves it out to both industry and folks like the Coast Guard. And then also have been a longtime partner of IOS, where we have sort of a similar mission where we are helping to essentially democratize access to data, right? So we are helping to ingest and harvest data sources and then reserve those either through various IOS program office efforts or through our regional association partners. So those are the sort of roles that I see that consultants are playing in the mid.
Thanks, Kelly. Joseph?
Sure, and hi, I'm Joe Conrad. I'm a senior economist, NOAA's chief economist shop. One of the big issues we find, I guess, from the governmental side is that we're limited in our capabilities to kind of survey the public. The PRA process, that's the Paperwork Reduction Act, requires us to go through, a stringent OMB kind of review period before we can kind of submit a survey or kind of explore the various societal needs or industry needs. So industry does have a lot more flexibility than the government in this area to kind of collect data on user needs and kind of behaviors. And as kind of we've highlighted, I guess, at the beginning of the presentation, is that one of the most important aspects is the value chain process, kind of understanding how the observations kind of go through the different data processing models, products, services, and then out to societal impacts. And I think kind of industry is fundamental in building this bridge between the observations produced and then the government and societal needs.
Thanks, Joe. Srinivasa?
Thanks, Chris. So this is Srinivasa Kumar. I'm director of the Indian National Center for Ocean Information Services. And as the name says, we have the mandate to observe, model, predict, and provide services to user communities. Now, that said, actually, I'd like to say a couple of things about what the role the industry might play in the spreading the decision-making tools. As all of you know, the governmental agencies mostly focus on scientific analysis and understanding, and then publications and bringing out new science. And but now there are these observation systems and models that we use are producing huge volumes of data. And then I think the industry can play a new role in actually some of these data analysis techniques, new techniques that are coming up, like machine learning and deep learning techniques to analyze these data sets and then build products that are very specific to users. And then the other thing is actually also the dissemination systems. When we talk about the maritime users of these services, there are different communication platforms on which these users would like to receive information. And then those are some areas. So what I'm trying to comment is actually the computational and communication systems and the technologies that can help with the reduction of the cost of observing systems itself. I think these are big areas where industry could play a role. And then developing, decision support tools, those kind of things are where I think we have worked successfully with the industry to develop some of those services to our end users. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. Rob, and then Derek.
Hi, yeah, I'm Rob Smith with Woods Hole Group. I guess we are an intermediary. We provide a number of service areas where we act as that intermediary, where we're taking in public domain and private data, and we're adding value to that data. We're doing it in the areas of ocean forecasting. We're doing it in the areas of deriving design and operating criteria for marine engineering projects, be those offshore, coastal, continental shelf, related to everything from offshore wind farms to oil and gas, to pipelines, to cables, to port and coastal facilities. We're also taking in and analyzing and modeling, undertaking modeling on the basis of existing public and private measurements and satellite data and other resources, in undertaking climate resiliency assessments as well. So there's a very broad range. Going to what was said earlier, we are also in some regards a data provider as well. We do undertake measurement programs on behalf of our clients. We undertake our own measurements for our own purposes. And we also facilitate some the measurement of data on, say, the fisheries management side of things by providing the systems to actually collect fishery data, such as vessel monitoring systems. So industry is actively involved in this area in many different spheres, I would say.
Derek, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'm Derek Snowden. I'm from the Integrated Ocean Observing System office in NOAA, in the National Ocean Service. And I wanted to elaborate on something that Joe said, because there's a bit of a contradiction inside right now. We're being encouraged. NOAA has recently published what's called a service delivery framework, and it is a guidance document, a framework for how we should be engaging with the public in co-designing and co-developing services. So while Joe's absolutely right, it's very difficult for us to do broad surveys because of Paperwork Reduction Act limitations. We're also being encouraged to really develop deep relationships with end users. And I think that's an area where including industry in those conversations to better understand observing requirements, prediction requirements could really help. It's labor intensive and collaboration is difficult, but the more we can invite a broad community into that discussion, the better, I think. And I'm glad to see Rob here because I expect that another project called the National Academy's Understanding Gulf Ocean Systems project might come up as a case study here because I think a lot of that co-design is happening in the Gulf of Mexico with oil and gas. So look forward to talking more.
So I want to come back to that thread on co-design, but let's go with Leif and Ken, and then I want to circle back on Derek's point.
Yeah, hello, Leif Bilday from Kongsberg Maritime. So what Derek here said was exactly the point that I would like to make, that the public sector could help and should help set standards and requirements and for measurements and so on. So if you're thinking that the ocean space has many different economic activities and we see new ones coming, right, from the more traditional ones like oil and gas, what would be useful is, of course, setting the guidelines. What are the principles for observations that needs to be done? How should it be done? Where should this data be published, etc. So we are, of course, in Kongsberg Group interested in participating in that. And at the same time, as we set boundaries, there's need to be some freedom to operate for the industry players. And I think that's a bit of a collaboration topic around this.
Good point, Leif. Ken?
Yeah, I'm Ken Childers. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with TerraDepth. We're a 5-year-old company. We provide offshore survey services using autonomous vehicles. So we're a data collector. We're also a data processor, but we also have a cloud-based portal system we call Absolute Ocean that we just recently released. But we're engaged in a couple of public-private engagements right now. One through the University of New Hampshire, and another through a nonprofit organization, which many of you are familiar with, called Seabed 2030. So our focus is primarily on mapping and imaging systems. And our Absolute Ocean system currently has approaching 3,000 public data sets in it, bathymetric data sets, ocean maps, and we provide value by putting these ocean maps into a more usable and easy to access, publicly available content delivery system, so that, you know, basically anybody with a browser and a little bit of experience can go in and explore ocean floor maps. We also enhance those maps by giving them continuity and creating a larger mapping scheme. And then our commercial customers, like surveyors, use them to collect data for their customers, put the data into Absolute Ocean, and then use it as a delivery vehicle. So we are really interested. I just want to make the statement, and I would be more interested in learning about what Derek was talking about, you know, in terms of the public-private partnership approach, because we would like to leverage that with organizations like IOS and other NOAA organizations, as well as we're also done some work with EMODNet and the UK Hydrographic Office. So, you know, we're really interested in that, and are just I'm here today trying to garner as much information as I can, as you know, how to proceed down that pathway.
Yeah, I'd like to circle back on something Derek brought up, which was this thought about co-design, and I want to ask a question in the vein of really our sort of public partners in this ocean observing space. So Srinivasa and Michelle and Kelly and Derek, folks who work on the observing system and data side in the public sphere. How do you all look at co-design with the private sector, not just in what observations are being collected, but how those observations are being translated into decision-making tools, and who carries that forward? Back to Leif's point of freedom to operate for industry. How does that process work? Kelly, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kelly Page. I'm the CEO of the Great Lakes Observing System, or GLOSS, or one of the IUCE regional associations. I think for me, the issues, really focused on like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the information need that you're trying to meet? And private sector is a great resource for tools to help address those needs and those issues, but they're not necessarily going to be the leaders on like solving the problem or solving the information needs. So it's just important to make sure that you're centering, when you're talking about co-design, you're centering the stakeholder, the user, and what their needs are, as the primary objective, and then looking to see who can, what are the roles and responsibilities, I guess, needed to fill that need, and who's best positioned to do that. So sometimes it'll be the public sector, sometimes it'll be the private sector, and sometimes it's a combination of both, and just understanding roles and responsibilities, and not necessarily presuming that it's either the public sector or the private sector that's going to be able to solve the problem.
Lawrence, and then Michelle.
Hi everyone, so my name is Laurence Cronier. I'm working at Mercator Océan in France, in Toulouse. I'm the head of the market and service team, and we are leading the Copernicus Marine Service, which is the ocean component of the Copernicus European Earth Observation Program. And so we deliver a lot of ocean data in a portal which is available at marine.copernicus.eu. We have a lot of in situ data, satellite data, and also ocean model data for Europe, but also for the world ocean. And we are very engaged in co-designing the portfolio and the service that we are delivering with our users. We have about 50,000 registered users, and we have more than 800,000 visitors on our website per year. So we have a lot of users, and a lot of them are coming from the public sector, but also from the private sector. And the way we co-design the service with the user is through different channels. We have, for example, a champion user advisory group, which is a set of users which we meet about twice a year, and they do represent the various communities of our users, so either from the private or from the public sector or from the scientific sector. And we do discuss with this champion user advisory group of how, what is needed in the offer and what should be improved, what should be added, and what we should do next. So we have this first champion user advisory group. We also do a lot of surveys, so where we ask our users what they need, what they want, what we need to change, what we need to improve. We are also doing a lot of user engagement workshops. So this is the way we co-design our offer with the users. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, and then Srinivasa, and then I'm going to switch to a different question.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Michelle Heipel, the Director of Australia's Integrated Marine Observing System. And we have a program that's really designed around creating societal benefit. And so we organize and plan what we're going to do inside the observing infrastructure based on understanding the needs of our end users and our stakeholders. So we have a lot of direct engagement with those parts of the community to try and figure out how we can best meet their needs across a broad range of sectors. It's a complicated thing, co-designing, when you're trying to meet, the needs of a wide range of users, all the way from industry through to research to consultants, government. So we do our best to manage that entire spectrum of people. So aside from direct interactions with those people, we have also sectors of our community that are designed around going out and engaging with people in their region. So regional nodes around the country that feed back that information into the office. And then every year or every second year, depending on how we're going, we run what's called the Forum for Operational Oceanography, where we try to bring together people from industry and government with the research sector and try to find what the needs are from industry and match them up with some of the appropriate research scientists so we can try to solve some of these issues and also direct how and where we might take our program going forward. I think these engagements are really critical, and they have even led to co-investment in our program by people in industry. And one of the reasons, working hand in glove with those people is really important is the reality is we are never going to have enough money in our government programs in the public programs to do everything we could or should do. And so leveraging off each other and working collectively to deliver these programs so that we can all benefit is really critical to our success going forward.
Thanks, Michelle. And Srinivasa.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So we try to involve all stakeholders while designing the service. Like for some of these stakeholders, the end user industry, for us, they actually come from fisheries. Sometimes it's strategic users like navies, coast guards, and oil and gas companies. So where we actually start with the users is actually with a user service. We tend to do surveys every year. We have workshops with the users, trying to actually communicate with them what are the services or products that are possible, and then trying to get their requirements, and then bring those requirements back to the applied research group, where actually scientists are working on either setting up a service or improving a service, and then look at what are the kinds of observations that are required, what are the institutes within the country that make these observations. So trying to bring all these stakeholders, we try to have these annual meetings where we bring them across and then try to kind of co-design a kind of a service or improvement of a service. So that's a very important part of what we do, Chris. Thank you.
No, thank you. I want to go back to sort of a thread that Ken started, and really with a question for our industry partners here, but really open to everyone. What barriers exist to developing information services? That's a huge question, I get that. But I want to follow it up with, are there discrete actions the public sector can take to lower those barriers? Rob.
I'm not sure about barriers, but what I will say is, as intermediaries, we tread a fairly fine line. Basically, like I said, we're adding value to data. And in that regard, we rely on there being space for us to add value to data. If we look at sort of the public entities as being largely the collectors of the data, we then seek to analyze it, to present it, and to utilize it to provide other data products and other results to our clients, who are the end users. Problem there is that what is value added today is potentially going to be provided by the public entities tomorrow. So that space for us to add value to the data can get squeezed. It's a natural process. So I think there's a real importance from our perspective to have a dialogue with the public sector, to know what their plans are coming up next, to know what value they're going to add to their data, and assess whether that's going to impact our business, impact our markets, whether that's going to squeeze us to having to sort of come up with another way of adding value to data that doesn't match that. On the other side of it, we also sometimes see, we're at risk where we also see, starting to see universities set up their own sort of commercial entities as spin-offs from those universities, sometimes to utilize the research and products of that research on a basis where that research may have been funded publicly, but now they're looking to sort of commercialize it, and they're looking to do that themselves. So again, we see others entering that sort of intermediary sector, but not necessarily from a sort of level playing field with those that from industry that are there already.
Those are great points, Rob. Thank you. Caroline.
I'd echo everything that Rob just said. He took the words right out of my mouth to some extent. So we're in the same situation. I'm sorry, Caroline Levy, Managing Director of Oceanwise, and we're based in the UK. We deal primarily with industry. We don't deal quite so much with public sector data, and that's primarily because in the UK, a lot of it, certainly in terms of real-time ocean observation feeds, is not available. So they don't have, the government organisations haven't got APIs available that we can connect to be able to share the data. You have to go online, you have to download it, and our customers, who are primarily in the port sector, want real-time information. So that's probably one of the biggest barriers that we have to enabling sharing of public sector data. We can find it, we know where it all is, because that side of things has been really well set up here in the UK, but the actual getting access to the data in a form that our customers need it is much more challenging. Thank you.
Thank you. Leif?
Yeah, so what Rob and now Caroline's said, totally agree on this. And we can learn something. I think around a decade ago, the movement of APIs, spawned out and became really a big thing, making information available in a format that is consumable, easily understandable, easily documentable. And actually, over in UK, we were involved in a previous gig over in Transportation for London. They wanted to provide information to the public of what are your transportation opportunities. They could have gone down and written an app for that, tightly integrated, etc. Or as they did, they provided the infrastructure around us, APIs, and let the community, the industry, so to speak, compete on building the right app in different forms and shapes, right? And this is what we want here. So we can leverage, I think, many approaches and methodologies from other industries, and APIs definitely is there. And what Rob said, where's the space where I can build even more value? So that doesn't mean, hey, we share data, go to this website, and a human can easily find and browse the data. Machines need to be able to find the data, connect to the data, enhance the data, etc. That's when you can find that space where you can add value, and that means that all of us, so Kongsberg being a tools provider and in several parts of this food chain, but everyone needs to contribute and make sure that you design APIs in, and a good mantra is APIs everywhere. If you can all achieve that, then it will be much easier to build on the shoulder of giants, because that's what we need to do.
Good recommendation. Thank you. Lawrence, and then Christopher. Oh, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
No,
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I fully agree with what was said by Caroline and Leif. Indeed, I mean, we really need to make user experience much easier and machine experience much easier with APIs, with visualization tools, and this is really key. Another aspect is data policy. Data needs to be delivered open and free, and industry should be able to redistribute the data as is or with added value as well. And this is the way the Copernicus is dealing with the data. Data policy is open and free. The data should be also sustained in time. This is really what users and this industry is looking for. They are looking for data which with time series which are not going to stop. They really need to have a sustained service. So they really want to know that they're using something that they are going to be able to keep using in the long term so that they can build a service on it. And last point is maybe we need more capacity building. We need to train more the industry on what is available, how they can use the data, what is possible to do with the data. So there is a lot to do on the capacity building side. Thank you.
No, those are good. Thank you. Christopher, and then Kelly, and then Kelly.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Chris Dickey from the Naval Research Lab, where I work on maritime domain awareness systems. So about information sharing, and from a public sector perspective, and my own personally, right? We have the technology, we have policies, but we fail a lot in implementation. And I think the implementation problem is a cultural problem, where people just don't want to share because they haven't been raised in their organizations that way. Maybe it's a generational thing, I don't know, but I have come across too many cases where people just don't want to do it because, oh, you're in another organization, we don't share information with you, right? And it's a personal decision, not an organizational one. It just gets real messy. So
That's a good point. Thank you. Kelly Page.
Thanks. I wanted to react to some comments earlier. I think maybe it was Rob that made them in terms of giving intermediaries or private sector room to add value, and having the public sector maybe communicate where they're intending to go, what directions they're going to go, so that helps industry decide. And I actually think that dialogue should happen both ways, because technology is advancing, new things are coming out all the time, and as a taxpayer, if I'm investing in ocean observations and the information coming from that, I expect the delivery of that information to also evolve as technology is evolving, right? Like, I don't want outdated or obsolete ways of receiving information. I think someone else mentioned user experience, right? So that is going to have to evolve. That's the baseline expectation, I think. And so it might be good for industry to think about what is actually commercially viable, and trying to really stay ahead of these emerging technology changes, so that actually helps public sector decide where they should focus their time and energy, and making sure that we are delivering that information at that level of expectation to the stakeholders, and letting industry operate where they shine best.
Kelly, and then Ken.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think there was a comment earlier about, requirements and standards and standardization in the industry. And I think at least here in the US, there are a good set of requirements and standards in place for our industry, for our community. We have built sort of a community of people that know how to both contribute and use data from organizations like IUCE, right? We do need to spend time kind of getting the word out about that and widening that community. And in terms of challenges, there's a real challenge around keeping pace with things like data volume and scaling, right? Keeping pace with the increasing resolution, increasing frequency. We're seeing exponential growth in the volume of data that we're dealing with. So just kind of managing that with some of the systems that we have set up now is a challenge, which is why some of us are looking towards the cloud and moving past some of the tools that we've used historically to manage large volumes of data. And that kind of goes hand in hand with technology fluidity, right? Advances in compute, advances in data science, advances in data modeling are occurring really rapidly, and that's exciting and fun for our community. But we, as the sort of data managers, data providers, need to be able to provide stability while kind of keeping up with all of those changes. So, to make sure that we're not falling too far behind in the technologies that we're using to provide data out to customers and out to the industrial users. I think also a challenge in data products and working with industry is where there's data gaps, lack of good data in places that people need it, or lack of data sharing. There may be data in a particular place, and this came up a little bit earlier, but the folks that have collected it are not sharing it. So I think, in terms of the role that the public sector could potentially provide and helping with some of those things is encouraging the sort of data brokers, the folks that are the go-betweens between the data collectors and the data users, to making sure that they're keeping up with the latest in technology, making sure that they're looking towards cloud-based solutions and just kind of continuous improvement in access to data and interoperability, really encouraging that interoperability between disciplines, I think, too, because there's lots of adjacent disciplines to the MedOcean industry that have data that's valuable to us, right? And then really, and I don't know how this could potentially be done, but really encouraging data sharing from industry. I think about offshore wind and the huge volume of data that's being collected here on the US East Coast. Lots of it's proprietary, and that's fine, but there's some data that maybe doesn't need to be proprietary. And how can we better encourage that industry to share data, to collect it in ways that will follow the standards that our community has established, and so that it can plug right in and be useful to a wider range of people.
Good points, Kelly. Thank you. Ken and Leif.
That's great. So Kelly just hit almost exactly on the point that I wanted to bring up there. So thanks, Kelly. But that is the point around, we find that there are huge repositories of data. We're specifically talking about ocean mapping data, like bathymetric data, that many people know, they don't even know it exists, right? And it's because it's been privately collected, or it's been collected by government agencies and labeled as, unshareable for one reason or another. We even had an instance not long ago in discussion with a government organization where they said, hey, we really like what you're doing. This is great. This is right up the alley. We want to start, working on how to get our data into this kind of format, but we're going to go away and decide whether or not we're going to do it ourselves or work with somebody like you. So it still is that propensity sometime to want to hold that data close, right? And I think that exists both in industry and in government, particularly in large organizations. Somebody mentioned it earlier, that people want to hold on to it, and they haven't really necessarily come out of a culture. But there is a lot of data out there that's aging data, but still very useful. I think industry and government should work with brokers or in-betweens like our company and some of the others like Rob's company, to help make that data more available in an easy access way. And then we'll find ways, honestly, to monetize it, but we'll find ways to monetize it in a way that is affordable for more general use, which helps everybody propagate the data. So that's my thought.
Thanks, Ken. Leif and then Rob.
Yeah, so good points from Ken there, and to what Christopher said here earlier on data sharing. I think we need to maybe an example. We work. So I'm a product manager for Blue Insight, and we work with with fisheries in northern Norway, and we talk about data sharing. We talk about how can you have more sustainable fisheries? Can you actually help fishers with finding the quota and get it up faster and so on, consume less bunker oil and etc. So there needs to be some sharing on data to make this happen. Where is the fish? And we need to be clean on really who are the customer here, who are the end user. So when you talk about, for instance, fisheries, there are local fishers who tend to be very protective about their little hotspot where they're always find their fish, versus let's say larger commercial fishing companies with fleets, maybe 50, 60 boats, right? Where you easily could share data and get route optimization and all kind of stuff, right? It's easier to envision a use case for sharing than let's say the local fisher guy with some maybe old habits of keeping things secret of where they go. So I think in those cases what we find out is that you really need to be good at articulating why sharing. What is the benefit? So what is the benefit for the larger organization? What is the benefit for the, let's say, smaller organization, this the fisherman, what will he get out of sharing data? Because it's not necessarily clear that it's the same thing, though.
Rob?
Yeah, I can just respond to a couple of those points. I think, you know, on the sharing of data, yes, there is huge volumes of data out there that should be shared. As intermediaries and as some of the collectors of that data, we are not necessarily the owners of that data. And I think there does need to be this dialogue, because the data has a value, maybe instantaneously if it's being used in forecasting, maybe for a certain period if it's being used for site characterization. But I think if there is a dialogue with the relevant industries, then that data can be shared. I think the wind industry, to my mind, from what I'm seeing, seems to be more inclined to share that information right from the start as a relatively new industry here in the US. The oil and gas industry maybe has been less so in the past, but I'm sure that, you know, if brought on board with a dialogue, they would do that. I would say that there are data sets that are collected by organizations like ourselves and others that are part of I guess our commercially usable data sources. So making those data public would compromise our ability to make money out of those data going forwards. That's an issue that we face, that, you know, those sort of data sets can't necessarily, because those data sets maybe are differentiators from our competitors. Touching on what Kelly said in terms of how we are, you know, how we update, how we utilize the data, and how we are utilizing the data, and how much. I think there are two aspects here. One is the provision of data to the public by intermediaries, which, yes, is very much something that should be in and is in the public eye. But I think for the most part, from our perspective as an intermediary, we're providing data to private clients who are paying us to analyze, add value to the data, and then send it to them. So again, we're not owners of the data products; they are, and having the space to add value to that data in that niche is is really dependent on us knowing what's being done in terms of adding value to data on the public side, and to make sure that there's that gap in between. I think one of the key areas for that is probably going to be in climate resiliency, where we've already moved forwards with providing value-added data to a client base that includes municipal, state level, and private organizations. But I think it's because we've moved faster in that arena. Because climate resiliency is in the public eye, and because it's of public concern because of things like flooding, I can see the public sector adding value to the huge data resources that exist there, and potentially squeezing that area that we've got to sort of add value to that data as well. On the fishery side that was just mentioned, there are monitoring systems available to collect that data. And I think one of the interesting things that we've seen most recently, especially with some of how fisheries interacts with some other maritime industries, is, yes, in the past, fishing interests at maybe a local and level have been a bit more shy of saying where they fish and how much they catch and so on and so forth. One thing we're seeing now, especially with the offshore wind industry, is fisheries interests are unable to demonstrate where they fish and what areas are important to them because they don't have that data. And there's a realization now amongst those fishing interests that we do need to collect that data and have it available so that we can show other ocean users why these specific areas are important to us. So I think there's a change on the fisheries side in terms of how that monitoring data is viewed. And there are systems out there to be able to provide that data.
Great, thank you. Derek and Eric, if you wanted to jump back in, I saw your hand was up, please feel free. We'll do Derek and then Michelle, and then I have one more question before we take a break.
Thanks. I wanted to, first of all, there's a question in the chat which prompted my my raising my hand. And I think Kelly, Paige, and Rob articulated two sides of a communication story there, where we want to know what industry is doing and industry wants to know what government is doing in order to better plan for where we're going to fill the gap later. I hope we can, perhaps in the next section, get a little bit more specific about what that interchange looks like, because I honestly don't know. That was one of my big questions coming into this morning's session, is what are the mechanisms for performing that communication? Is it dialogues like this? Is it the professional society meetings? Is it annual reports or some other roadmap? I've heard that variation of what is NOAA doing in this space in many different conversations. And so I hope we can get a little more specific about that.
I was actually
going to ask questions, Chris. So
no, I was going to raise that question. I'm glad you did. So that's what I wanted to sort of take our next 10 to 15 minutes on, was, looking at George's question in the Q&A and really asking it maybe from a broad and holistic way. What are the feedback mechanisms that speak to George's point of, how does industry provide feedback to the public sector to justify the expense of observing assets and data being collected, but also to Rob's point at the start of this session, how do industry and the public sector interact so that there is freedom to operate, and so that folks understand where different entities are working and where the division of labor is? What are those feedback mechanisms? Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Eric Siegel. I'm the executive in residence at the Creative Destruction Lab and the Chief Innovation Officer for Canada's Ocean Frontier Institute. So I'm calling from north of the border, although I did grow up in Washington, D.C., so fun to connect with all of you back in that area. I did answer George's, and hi, George, I answered his question, or I provide my response to that is I would actually turn it around a little bit in terms of saying who's the onus is on. And I think the onus could be on the public sector to just add some KPIs in terms of what the final value is that the industry is providing from the publicly available data, such as the revenue that the private companies are generating, which in turn creates jobs and taxes and all of those things that has been enabled from the publicly available data. So lots of, this is how it frequently works, is that the intermediaries create value from the publicly available data, and then the value they're creating through jobs and taxes and actually the real value, like how to enable offshore wind, how to mitigate climate, those intangible values come back to the governments through that publicly available data. So I would say that question could be flipped around a little bit. And then just very briefly commenting on how universities and research organizations through publicly available data and even maybe publicly funded research projects are having maybe an unfair or supported example of getting into ocean industries. I think about it a little bit differently. If we say that the ocean blue economy is 2.5 trillion and going to move to 3 trillion in the next several years, and that's 500 billion of growth, which means that there is room for everyone and room for new things. So it's not just going to be the same players that are going to realize that kind of growth. There has to be new innovation, new players. It means some companies may be successful, some may not. That means both existing and startups. And from what we see at Ocean Frontier Institute is innovation officers from all of the largest global organizations are coming to us saying, we have these problems that we want to innovate. Can we learn what's happening in the research organizations? Because they see that as a core innovation engine. And likewise for us, we see that we need to get the innovation out of the universities and have impact through commercial markets. So I think there's a really nice link there. I don't think it's like one versus the other. I think they really can come together. And we see both governments, public sector as being good users of some of this early innovation to try to help them innovate, and certainly large established organizations, private organizations, using some of this innovation to help them innovate, or being the acquirers of these startups so that they then have proprietary rights to enable this innovation, which is a way to help them grow.
Thanks, Eric. I like the response you wrote back to George, and I like where you took that question. And I want to open it up to everybody else on how do you feel about both the feedback mechanism question, but also Eric's point of of having public sector data delivery success metrics tied to priming industry growth? Kelly.
Well, I love the idea of KPIs, but I do feel like, and I was getting ready to address it in the chat, but I'll just say it now. I think revenue generation is, you know, a little too industry centered for me when we're talking about public sector KPIs. I mean, that can be an outcome of it, of course. But I think, you know, we can't forget that, you know, we have a responsibility to these societal problems, water quality, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that those should really be centered. And then the economic benefits, you know, that come from that work are a happy extra bonus on top of that. If industry wants to center revenue generation as their key performance indicator, then that's fine. But for me, for public sector, I feel uncomfortable putting that as the like #1 KPI.
Michelle, and then Joe.
Yeah, I would pick up where Kelly has left off in that, you know, our remit in IMOS is to provide research infrastructure that supports both research and industry. And so we're there to deliver information that those sectors can use. And, you know, I think we have to keep in mind that we're also talking about public good and public resources here. And there's an obligation for us to manage those well. And as oceans become a greater and greater issue in the public eye, there are also social license things that come along with this and our license to operate. So I think we need to think about where the public programs sit and what the remits are. I think a KPI around you know, generating revenue is probably a bridge too far for most of us, but that doesn't mean that I don't get asked regularly how my program can and does help support industry. And we do by providing this base that industry can operate from and make decisions from. So we certainly want to work with them, but I think, yeah, that's probably as far as we can go.
No, good point. Thank you. Joe and Claire and Rob.
And sure, I think Claire is actually going to probably echo me, is that in terms of revenue, I guess both Claire and in the US, NOAA, along with the Bureau of Economic Analysis, have released kind of a revenue, we call it the Marine Economic Satellite Account, and I'll share the link in the chat, but it basically accounts for, I guess, revenue by marine sector. But I guess to another point is that, yeah, revenue is not necessarily benefit. And so I guess if you are trying to, I guess, capture benefits outside the revenue generation by different marine sectors, that would require kind of different economic approaches. And one of those is kind of this natural capital accounting effort that's going on within the government. Europe also has an approach to that too, but those are two different concepts, and I'm happy to elaborate on those, but I don't want to digress too much. But I just wanted to highlight this. We call it MESA statistics, and I'll put it into the chat.
Oh, Claire and then Rob.
Yeah, thanks for this. So I'm Claire Joly, and I work for an international organization called the OECD. So I think our report was actually mentioned at the beginning. And we projected the ocean economic growth to 2030, and we are actually relaunching a large foresight exercise right now to see where we're going by 2045. Because we see an acceleration of climate change, biodiversity loss. We think it's going to actually impact much more the ocean economy in particular than what we expected. So I just wanted to rebound on actually what Kelly said. We have done quite a bit of work on trying to value marine data. And by marine data, we're talking here not only about ocean essential variables, but also marine data, typically fisheries data, stock of fish. So we have quite this large exercise that we have launched over the past few years, conducting some national case studies with marine data value chains. And when we're talking about value chain for us, obviously there are a number of KPI that resonate with the industry in terms of, indeed, a lot of the data find its way eventually into commercial products that bring revenues, employment, but not only. And this is something that we really want to stress as an international organization, which realizes that for the time being, most of the ocean data that will be publicly available will be funded by the public sector. And beyond, obviously, sustaining a blue tech sector that's growing, and it's very important. That links back to the question about the satellite account on ocean economic activities, where we see a blue tech sector appearing and growing in many different OECD countries. So sustaining this sector, it's wonderful. And this is very important. I believe that indeed more and more services will be of great use, particularly to governments, but there are many more values that need to be taken into account. So when considering KPI, I would indeed stress that we need to think beyond industry in this particular case. And that's it. That's it for now, Chris.
Thanks, Claire. Well, Rob and then Kelly, you'll wrap up this first session.
Hi. One thought I had in terms of how we set up this dialogue is I think to define the intermediary market sectors. There are some that I know of, that ocean forecasting, metocean design and operating criteria derivation, climate resiliency, for example, but there are probably many more. I think we need to define those sectors and then ideally get dialogue set up with the public sector. I mean, from a US perspective, specifically NOAA, so that we can talk around, what data we are utilizing in those sectors, what value we're adding to those sectors, what plans NOAA has to add value to data in those sectors going forwards, and so that we can be appraised. And it requires setting up working groups of interested parties from both NOAA and the private sector. But I think we almost need to look at it by specific market sectors. So that's one thought. And I guess the next one is, you mentioned earlier the UGOS 3 initiative that's underway. Have industry involved with publicly funded research and innovation programs where that focuses on provision of operational observations or the production of source data that can potentially be utilized as value-added products, or in the creation of monitoring, innovative monitoring systems that can then be applied in industry. As to how that works, it's not a publicly, I suppose, typically publicly funded situation, but UGOS 3 specifically required there to be industry involvement in that program, so that there was inclusion of industry, and there was a link between the research that was being done under UGOS 3 and the end users who would basically take that data and apply it in real world. So I guess in many ways, as part of that program, Woods Hole Group are providing that link between the research and the end users, and we're very cognizant of that. So yeah, I think there's room to link there and to get involved there, but it has to happen at the outset. It can't be sort of tagged on at the end. We also seen developments in technologies for observation come out of other programs such as DARPA, for example, where they've had great brains coming up with new ideas of new ways to observe our oceans and to collect really useful data. And then at some point, DARPA decides, okay, well, this doesn't actually need to be top secret. This can be shared with the public, and this can be utilized. And then they're keen for the developers of that technology to go out and find industry partners to be able to sort of commercialize it. So we do see mechanisms like that happening and working. That is another success story, I suppose, in that area.
Excellent, thank you. And Kelly.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on Kelly Page's point. I agree on revenue not being paying around among KPIs, and that's coming from a private sector perspective. That sort of makes me queasy too, because I think that there is a lot more value to the data and the things that we're doing in this community than just the revenue that the private sector folks are generating. I mean, that is important to some extent, but we do need some sort of feedback mechanism to demonstrate the value in the use and users of data sets. And I think that is a real challenge, especially because we have a fairly distributed system, right? And so there's not a central way to be measuring use and measuring users and measuring statistics of data services versus portals. And I think we also need to make sure that we're thinking not just about use of portals and drive data sets, but how do we measure the use of those original data sets that contributed to the derived data sets, right? Because they're inherently adding value all the way through the chain as folks are adding value added products and systems. So, you know, metrics around how much services get used are important. And I would also consider the value that the services are bringing to the users, right? We love to see the Coast Guard using our services and search and rescue operations. That brings a huge amount of value, even if the statistics, the amount of hits on those services is not high, right? It's really important that they have the data available at their fingertips in the moment that they need it to execute a search and rescue mission. But I think one thing that we're also overlooking is the sort of, Kelly made another point about public good, thinking about sort of the digital divide that we've got and diversifying our user base and thinking about underserved communities and their access to data, right? And how can we bring more value to underserved communities that maybe don't know about the data that's available to them, aren't sure how to access it. I think we need to value increasing use of data in those communities very, very highly as we bring more use to those communities. And one thing that RPS is doing in partnership with Maricus, which is the Mid-Atlantic Regional Association, is we're considering hiring a product developer from an underserved community in the Maricus region to really help us bring the perspective of the communities that we're not currently speaking to or talking to.
Excellent. Thanks, Kelly. Leif, one last comment.
Yes, I think it's probably right what's been pointed out here. Public services should focus on what is their main purpose, right? And solve those problems. And I think there is possibly others that will, let's say, track the KPIs of community companies, you know, startups, etc., that are using data and so on, and how to use it. Investors will, for sure, private investors. And if you think about also coastal communities, where you find a lot of the players, right? It's not in the cities. It's not in the central capitals. It's out in the districts where you'll find a lot of smaller companies booming, and the local communities will measure it in, okay, is this island community still alive? Maybe yes or no. Okay, we're growing a couple of companies, so they will track it anyhow. So yeah, I don't think we need to burden necessarily public services in general with the task of tracking here. I think that's something that industry itself and investors will do for us.
Good point. Thank you. So I'm going to pause for a second. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to reconvene and dive into our second session. Thanks, everybody, for your great input so far. There's a few questions still that people can answer if they want to, or layer in on the Q&A. And I'll see you back at 15 after the hour. All right, folks, welcome back. Give folks a few more seconds to come back on, and then I'll kick us off with session 2. In the interim, though, I just do want to point out that there are some really great questions that are open in the Q&A, but also some that have been moved to answered, but still are great questions. So please feel free, everybody, to jump back and forth between those, layer in your answers, layer in your thoughts. We won't be able to elevate every question to the main discussion, but there's some really great points in there that I think folks would enjoy enriching. So welcome back. We are going to dive into our second session, which is focused on the challenges and opportunities with respect to growing the market. And so we've touched a little bit on this, but I want to dive deeper specifically into sort of the economics and sort of the broad global underpinning of the work we're doing. The first question is, how do we better catalyze research and innovation to advance market opportunity? And are there specific approaches that are most helpful in creating the enabling conditions for growth? Circle?
Hi everyone, Circle Guron, Rutgers University Eco Complex. I am the director of the Eco Complex. Also, we are launching a new accelerator program, especially designed for underserved innovators and businesses for offshore wind supply chain. And I know, this is whole marine thing, but because I am joining this group from my angle for offshore wind development. And so what to do and why am I here also? Interestingly, I agree with that. And also I'd like to stress that all sectors, they should really understand the coexistence, the value of coexistence, because it's going to improve their businesses at the end. And so that's why data sharing is so important. What we are going to do, or we are currently planning, organizing an accelerator program for small businesses. It could, I'm dealing with some young companies already. I'm talking to. They're developing communication technologies, underwater, communications, and so on and so forth. It's still, it's in the infancy. The program is in the infancy, but we're providing a financial data, financial support, I should say. And also they will be creating cohorts soon, and education is so important. And especially, they should really understand the new startups. It was mentioned a couple of times. They should really understand that data is important for them, but also their data is so important for others. But also, it should be a coexistent and defining the conflicts between the sectors when they are creating data and also using others' data. And we should try to help that conflicts should be, the tools should reduce the conflicts but increase the transparency and the value of the data. That's, I'd like to say, because the accelerator program may help, hopefully will help. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie.
Yes, hi. I am a partner and chief scientist with Propeller Ventures, which is a new ocean venture capital fund. And addressing this question on innovation, I wanted to draw out the model. Someone had mentioned earlier DARPA, but there's also ARPA-E, which has been putting considerable funding, really structured funding efforts into carbon dioxide removal, biofuels, ocean carbon dioxide removal, among other topics. And from the standpoint of stimulating innovation, as a venture capitalist, we look at that as non-dilutive funding because the agency is not taking an equity stake in the companies that they fund. And often we find that some of the most innovative work requires longer lead times around R&D. This is a gap that venture capital it can be more reluctant to fund R&D on longer time horizons. So organizations and entities like philanthropic funding, as well as ARPA-E, examples of how these other actors and players can play a role in accelerating innovation and from an R&D perspective. I also wanted to draw attention to the Interagency Council for Advancing Meteorological Services, or ICAMS, and someone in the federal government is probably much more appropriate to speak about this new entity than I am, but it's potentially a model for what the oceans might be able to achieve in terms of a coordinating body, and would love to hear more from anyone in the federal sector about that particular, the role of that entity in accelerating some of the topics we've been talking about here. Thank you.
Thank you. If anybody wants to respond specifically to Julie's question, please feel free to raise your hand. But more generally, I'm curious if folks have thoughts on what is necessary broadly in the ocean observing market to enable growth. What conditions are not being met when we think about potential market growth? We've had some discussions around the potential size of the market, but what's needed to grow this market to that projected size? Kelly?
I think one huge thing that we haven't touched on much yet is a workforce, right? The market opportunity of this industry is huge, as everyone has mentioned, but it's really hard right now to hire folks in this industry that can contribute in ways. I see Kelly agreeing with me, that can contribute in ways and add value in the way that we need them to right off the bat. And so we're really focused on workforce development and reaching out back into the university communities and kind of communicating with them about our needs and what we see as the needs for our industry, and also looking at adjacent industries and how we can pull folks in from adjacent industries to help with some of the things that we need to do to focus on our industry. So I think that's a real place where there's a potential for the public and the private sector to sort of co-invest in workforce development needs and make sure that we're getting that right, and then we're building the base of the folks that we need to support this industry in the future.
Great point. Thank you. Eric and then Kelly.
I was just going to echo exactly what Kelly said, and I think everyone here agrees. We think about this in two ways. One is, as Kelly said, trying to get people from adjacent industries into oceans. We all on this call live and breathe oceans every day. We love it. We know it exists. We know it's a great career. It's meaningful. It's challenging, all that. But probably most of the world doesn't have that same connection to the ocean. And so trying to create awareness for people in all other industries, in computer science and math and in everything, social sciences, to understand that the oceans is a really good place for them to have a career and make an impact. And I know it wasn't my quote, but I loved it when someone said, when a graduate gets out of this university and moves and goes to Facebook or Twitter, it's just a major loss and really disappointing, because they should come and work in this industry. Some really interesting things on Twitter after Elon Musk took over and started firing people, and lots of people, thousands of people were losing their jobs. Really interesting people that I'm following in climate are saying, like, take a little break, take a couple weeks off, and then come back and realize you can still have really technical work while making a difference in the oceans or climate sector. Don't just go work for another CRM type of tech company. That's one thing. The other is taking researchers within the university sector and realizing that they can have similar impact by moving their research into the industry side of things, right? And scaling it very large. We know that in a lot of undergraduate and graduate schools of engineering, computer science, chemistry, even agriculture, the students know that they're going to move out and work in industry afterwards. It's just kind of a given. But in the ocean sciences sector, some 80% of them really have ambitions and expectations. They're going to continue to stay in academia, which is a great ambition, but there aren't enough work for 80% of them. So helping them understand that, and I'm a little facetious here, but saying, like, counting whales is not the only way to have an impact. You can also make a really positive impact through industry, and just having them realize it's not moving to the dark side. It's actually bringing your expertise and contributing it in a really massive way.
Great points, Eric. Thank you. Kelly and Leif.
So building on what's already been said, an exciting discipline or field that's emerging right now for me is the field of public interest technology. And so reflecting on all the people that quit after Elon Musk took over Twitter, I was like, ooh, a lot of recruits for the public interest technology sector. I'm so excited. And this is really, you know, the notion that there are a lot of technologists out there, you know, who are working on all different aspects of the issue, not just ocean observing and data sharing specifically, but thinking about, you know, security issues and, you know, just that larger data management infrastructure that we've been kind of hinting at as well through the conversation, and growing the capacity, frankly, within the public sector to have that expertise to provide proper direction and oversight in addressing some of these challenges that we're talking about today, and helping identify, you know, where are good roles for the public sector versus the private sector in solving some of these challenges, and just making sure that the public sector has, you know, enough expertise and capacity in-house to provide these services adequately.
Good point, Kelly. Leif.
Yeah, and in terms of recruitment and having the workforce, I mean, I think we need to work, you know, directly in towards universities, and we do that here at Kongsberg, setting up summer projects for students, and we're so lucky that they're so smart that the stuff they build goes very soon into product. As a product manager, it's a great resource, because students don't come with that sort of a corporate blockage or let's say boundaries of what is possible. So for us, that's a humongous source of innovation. And if you think about it, there's two things. Number one, for smart people, you need to sell them a good challenge. So what are the challenges that we are trying to solve? They are very fundamental to the existence, right? Providing food for the population of the planet, healthy oceans, etc. These are massive challenges. So then the next thing is cool technology. So do you want to write SQL statements for a business app, for a bank, or do you want to work with robotics? Do you want to work with acoustic sensors? It is incredible technology. And if you think about machine learning and autonomous vessels, etc., it's probably difficult enough to do that on the road, but it is certainly very difficult to do it when you are at ocean and the connectivity is so and so. So I think those two things would be, you know, go in, explain the challenges that you will contribute to, and here's the technology you're going to work with, and students will love that.
That's great. Thank you. I'd like to take us in a different direction now on this thread of market growth. And so my question is, and forgive me if it's a bit more loaded, are incubators and accelerators, these blue tech clusters that are popping up, are they a good way to facilitate market growth? Or is their impact more limited to creating and growing competition? Ken.
Thanks, Chris. I think the answer to the question is yes, both. Our company just this past year participated in an NGA accelerator, which went on for most of the summer and was an extremely eye-opening experience in terms of getting more immersed in the whole culture of a large government entity, you know, that deals specifically in our space, which is, you know, basically different types of, you know, geosciences and mapping technologies, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to meet a lot of interesting other companies that were involved. We're actually partnering in a big way with one of those other companies that was involved. We are now in the throes of negotiating CRADA with NGA, which we hope will take us into a co-development space for a particular application of our Absolute Ocean product. And we are also exploring ways to, if you will, in a sense, kind of co-market into their ecosystem what we can deliver and how we can help them provide their data in a more economical and easier to consume fashion for a lot of their stakeholders. So, I say that, that was an excellent experience for Teradep.
Great, thanks, Ken. Kelly and then Claire.
Yeah, I think I probably have a bit of a biased view on this because the Northeast is a bit of a nexus of blue tech incubators and accelerators. I think we have 10 between Massachusetts and Rhode Island alone. And so there's an incredible amount of events and networking and panel discussions and pitch fests that you can go to, in any given month, which, for me and for industry, I think is a lot of fun, right? Because there's constant opportunities to go and learn about what's next, what's up and coming, what are the opportunities to integrate new technology into the work that we do and the work that industry does. So I see a lot of value there in sort of growing this market, facilitating market growth. I think there's a lot of value from a networking perspective. I think there's value from workforce development. I mean, back to Leaf's points, right? They're the ones that are on the sort of leading edge of technology. They're the ones that are pulling in software engineers and systems architects from adjacent industries and really kind of selling them on the excitement of what we're doing in our industry. And so I think that really helps with the workforce development. It's also bringing in sort of executive level and management level folks from other industries as startups become successful and they need to grow. They're bringing in expertise from completely different industries to help run those startups. And so they're integrating sort of those types of perspectives. From my perspective, it really helps us keep up with advancements in technology. And so as we're talking to our industry partners, we can bring new solutions to the table. We can, mention some of the things that we've learned about, bring in these companies that we've talked to. And it's a differentiator for us as a larger company to be aware of all of these things and kind of talking to our clients about them. So yeah, I see lots of potential for these sorts of incubators helping grow the market. Absolutely.
Good, thank you. Claire and Eric.
Thanks. So maybe just on competition. Competition is good. Competition is good for innovation. Competition is good for government users, those that are actually procuring many of the blue tech systems that we are talking about here. But on the point of the value, I would say, of some of these accelerator incubators. So we looked at the OECD at different models, different what we call innovation networks. We sort of put all these different initiatives into this big family of ocean economy innovation networks. And indeed, I mean, they're popping up everywhere. We looked at quite a number of them, particularly, let me maybe just mention the Ocean Frontier Institute. Eric, you're on the call, and I know you're going to speak right after me, but also colleagues from the UK at the Marine Autonomous and Robotic Systems Center, where they have many different initiatives linked to incubators. And we see indeed a lot of benefits in these initiatives, not only in terms of the improved cross-sector synergies. There are sometimes very nice ways to actually get ideas from different sectors, in data analytics in particular. We see also, in some cases, the possibility for some of the members of these initiatives to actually access various research facilities. This is excellent for startups in particular, and specialized knowledge that they get from universities that are often linked also into some of these initiatives. We see this opportunity to bring to market brand new products. So incubating indeed many of these products. And we see then, just a couple of years later, some of these products actually bought out by larger actors, but also in government again. And obviously, SMEs, startups, they use very different support schemes through these networks. So overall, I think they're very beneficial. They're sometimes involve public investments again. to function. But definitely, the way to go forward will be indeed to make sure that many of the small, the entrepreneurs are aware that some of these networks exist, so that they can actually take advantage and ramp up some of their ideas. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
Great points, Claire. Thank you. Eric, Caroline, and Tatiana.
Yeah, I just want to follow up with what Claire said, and I totally agree that when the question is, does it create economic opportunities or competition? I think the answer ought to be both, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Competition really just focuses the scarce resources on making sure it's most efficiently used. And I think the sort of incubators and accelerators concept should be thought about in a couple different timeframes of delivery. So from the longest timeframe and sort of the biggest ecosystem development concept is just getting people to think that commercializing ocean technology is a really good opportunity. And so we all know that Woods Hole Group, I'm sorry, not to Woods Hole Group. We all know that Woods Hole Oceanographic is one of the hubs of science in the world. And we all know that in Woods Hole specifically is a coffee shop called Coffee Obsession, right? That's where everyone is talking, all the best researchers in the world are talking about collaborations. And you hear conversations about collaborations, about partnerships. You almost never hear conversations about commercialization or investment. And I would love to have had a time series of discussions over the coffee table in the last 10 years, and then what that looks like in the next 10 years. And I'm really hoping that what Julie and Propeller are doing is changing that dialogue. So more and more frequently you hear that, because you do hear that in coffee shops in New York and San Francisco and Toronto about how technology can be accelerated through commercialization and investment. And I hope that happens in the ocean sector. So some of the blue tech accelerators are just creating the awareness that this is an opportunity, and it's a very long-term play. You won't see benefits from it tomorrow or next year, but hopefully in sort of 10, 20 years, you'll see that. Then there's sort of the medium-term play, which I would call, at least in the US, the commercialization support for the SBIR grants, right? And NOAA does this, and they have specific commercialization support for the money they're putting into NOAA SBIRs. And I think that's important because they're putting good money into really interesting innovators, but maybe they don't have the experience to commercialize. And if those innovations are not commercialized, then the users on this group, such as Great Lakes Observatory, such as Woods Hole Group, such as Kongsberg, they'll never be able to realize that opportunity. So having that commercialization support to maybe not create massively scalable companies, but really important SMEs that maybe would help RPS enter a new market and increase their overall performance by 10%. Like, that's really meaningful. And then on the last end are the sort of short-term benefits for really large scale and massively scalable companies. And that's where Propeller and Creative Destruction Lab is working to help support massively scalable ocean innovations. And we're seeing this on short-term benefits. For example, one of the metrics we use at Creative Destruction Lab is equity value created by companies that come through our program. In the last 2 years, we've helped our companies create $500 million of equity value, which has happened in 2 years. And that's going to show in terms of products and services that they can bring to the market quite quickly.
Thanks, Eric. Caroline and Tatiana.
So I'm obviously going to speak from a UK perspective because I don't have any knowledge of what happens in other places. We've had a few less good experiences of these the accelerator type programs as an SME. In the UK, we've had difficulty getting on board particular accelerators because our address was not in the county where it had to be, where you had to, your organisation had to be based, which then was, great for the companies down in that area, but meant that we were completely excluded when we're still just an SME. And then, we've successfully been part of accelerators. But actually, they ended up being unfunded ones. So then we were absorbed into an accelerator to develop something, which wasn't quite made clear as part of the whole accelerator program, which may be just kind of, it's a learning process for us as much as anything else. But that meant that we're doing projects and R&D alongside our day-to-day business. And when we are a small company, we're only a team of 17. And we have to keep our customers who are keeping our business going happy, and maybe they're then sidetracked into these kind of accelerators, stops us focusing quite so well on our customers. So they seem like a great idea, But the experience that I've had so far is not encouraging me to kind of get involved in more of them. So that's just from a perspective over here.
That's good perspective. Thanks, Caroline. Tatiana and then Srinivasa, and then I'm going to ask a different question.
Thank you, Chris. Tatiana Daravidisyan with the Economist Group, working for the World Ocean Initiative. This is actually, it kind of follows on from the previous speaker's comments, which is that I think that there's also a disparity. So yes, in essence, I agree that they are good, but it depends where you are. So for example, in North America, there seems to be a really strong infrastructure for this, but in other parts of the world there isn't. And I think that what's really important for, especially in the blue tech cluster space, is making sure that there's a deeper connection between these different clusters around the world, and then making sure that there's access to some of the communities that are most vulnerable to a lot of the to climate change impacts, and allowing them access to these opportunities to go out and develop solutions to address these challenges.
Thank you. Srinivasa.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So yeah, in India as well, there have been some very recent initiatives actually with the government trying to, have these events with the industry. They're called iConnect, Industry Connect, and then it's actually, happening, a lot more is happening in the ocean space as part of these events, and where we actually try to, these government agencies such as ourselves, we try to invite the industry, talk to them, raise awareness on the availability of ocean data, what are the infrastructure, government infrastructure, public infrastructure that they can leverage on, and then where are the opportunities, what are the case studies, and whether there are any business opportunities where they could actually scale up what we're already doing, because there is only as much that we can do as public enterprises, but then there is a lot more that the industry can do. So I think that's a space, I think it's going to be very beneficial, these blue tech clusters and the, incubators and accelerators, getting in those startups, and then, that's, I think, a good way to grow the market.
Thank you. So I think I'm gonna ask another question just to try to balance out this conversation, and to be fair to all of our non sort of incubator, accelerator, private sector folks. If we think about targeted public investment like SBIR or DARPA or ARPA-E, if some folks have mentioned, and similar funding in other nations, but also public observing systems like IMOS and IUS and the funds they invest in growth. How do we best assess the return and impact of public investment in both delivering public value, as we emphasized earlier, but also creating opportunities for growth in the market? Leif?
So I would just say that let's use maybe standard economic figures around this. So jobs created, revenue, etc. I mean, I don't think this is actually anything special to the ocean space or the ocean enterprise versus any other industry. That's just the short answer to that.
No, good answer. Thank you. Joe?
And sure, yeah, I mean, you really have to try, I mean, especially thinking about SBIR, you need to track the grantees and kind of what the proposals are, and then kind of identify what the impacts or the outcomes of those different grants are. And I mean, we've tried to do this with SBIR. We looked at the feasibility research, R&D, and then the kind of the ultimate commercialization of the projects. But I guess what my office, and I guess a lot of other, partner NOAA offices, we're kind of trying to go in a little bit more detail using kind of input output analyses to kind of understand the revenue, job creation, innovation, exports, and other metrics to kind of go a little bit further with this too. So yeah, I mean, this is something we're definitely keen on, I guess, developing further.
Thanks, Joe. That's good to hear. Michelle?
Yeah, this is an interesting space and an interesting question. Last year, IMOS actually hired a consultant, an economic firm, to do a return on investment analysis of our program for us. And what they determined was there are a range of benefits of programs like IMOS and IOs, and others will be the same. You know, they valued our program based on our contributions to weather forecasting, you know, industry operations, particularly making decisions based on ocean conditions and forecasting for the ability of oil and gas and others to operate, our contributions to defense capability, improved policy responses in managing our marine resources and things like disaster and extreme weather preparedness. So how we can help, you know, understand the track and intensity of tropical storms, those sorts of things. And ultimately what they came up with was a benefit to cost ratio of around 12 to 1, with at least about $5 of benefit generated for every dollar that IMOS and its partners contribute into the program. And one of their main comments in the document, which I'm going to read because I find it really, as a marine scientist, I find it really fantastic that these economists came to this conclusion, and that is, to a significant extent, some benefits from IMOS's activities and data cannot be quantified. Knowledge of the ocean is a public good, the immediate value of which to humanity is not always obvious or possible to quantify in dollar terms.
That's a great point. I'm glad you read that. Thank you. Rob and Kelly. Oh, Rob, we need to unmute you.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying, I think, you know, when we look at public investment in creating observations, creating data, my understanding is that's always done with an eye on public benefit. That data is specifically for that. I kind of see that creating market opportunities from that data, it's kind of a bonus. It's not necessarily what the prime objective is. The prime objective is to provide data to support public interest, like safety at sea, like safe navigation, like flood resiliency, and so on and so forth. If those data can be utilized elsewhere, then in many ways it's a bonus. And I kind of wonder why that has to be quantified to a certain extent. There's no doubt that, you know, we could spend probably a lot of resources in identifying exactly how that data is used, but I don't necessarily think that's, we've already talked about, you know, we have finite resources and we have problems with recruitment. I'm not sure it's the best use of people's time.
That's fair. Kelly and Leif.
Michelle's comments sort of reminded me. So one of my jobs is that on a regular basis, I go to Capitol Hill and I tell our elected officials why they should care about ocean observing and ask them to invest more money in it. And much to my dismay, I would love to walk in with a lot of facts and statistics about how many users we have and what's so popular. And I work very hard at Gloss to have those analytics at my fingertips. But the most compelling thing in these visits is having a charter boat captain, you know, come in and say that they're using the data and why they care about it so much. So a regular person from their district. And that can, you know, be more effective than any numbers or statistics that I give, you know, in a congressional office. So I would just encourage everyone to think about the practical applied use in everybody's day-to-day lives of this information and how influential that can be when you're trying to drive more investment in these types of activities.
Good point, thank you. All right, Leif and Srinivasa.
So while there is a greater public good for let's say doing more research, more science, etc. I think if we don't back it with actually hard facts, hard numbers, we just put ourselves in a risk that funds will be cut at, let's say, the first opportunity. It feels like that many times. So those that manage the purse, the public purse, may not respond very well just to that we have a task of a greater good here. So I think the more financial facts or figures that are attached to it, the easier it would be to argue that public sector should fund activity. It's just, yeah,
great point.
feeling.
Yeah, thank you, Leif. Srinivasa, Rob, and Eric, and then I think we'll tie this question off.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And yeah, I'll be brief actually here. I mean, this is a very important thing, that we keep getting asked actually. What is the benefit of these observations or services that we are giving actually? Because we are using public funds. Now, we've tried to do an exercise, and like others mentioned, it's a tough thing. And then we've engaged, an agency called the National Center for Applied Economic Research, did a kind of a survey on what is the impact of some of these services, like, because most of these are intangible. For example, you give a tsunami warning and lives are saved, what is the value that we put to it? But then this agency tried to actually put some value, saying that, okay, there was a cyclone forecast, and then there were about 100,000 people evacuated. What did it cost the government for getting these people evacuated? And then by just giving a no threat advisory of a tsunami, that the tsunami is not coming and you don't need to evacuate people, you are saving that money. So similarly, actually on the fishing, if you're telling fishermen to go to a certain place and then do fishing, and if he saves on fuel, if he's actually, he's saving money, but then he's also putting less carbon into the environment, into the atmosphere. So some such, estimates have been made. And then, like, for example, I'll just quote on the fisheries. If you actually give fishing advisories to the fishermen, it actually adds about 7.58% to the marine fisheries GDP. So these are some of the figures that have been put out. But what I'm trying to say is actually we need to actually keep doing this and then try to quantify the benefits of these our services so that there is a strong case for us to put up to the policymakers when we actually ask for public funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Rob, and then Eric.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on what Kelly said about investment. I think it's a really important point there. We as an organization, we've been working with regional associations, IUS regional associations, to develop projects to utilize the public data, add value to it, and provide services that could be in the public interest and also interest to to industries. The problem being is that much of the time the funding there for IUS is just enough to keep the basics going and not enough to develop any of these programs. So funding is critical, a critical part of this discussion, and from what we've seen recently, it's just not been there.
Yep. Eric, and then Tatiana.
So Kelly's example of having the fisher person speak about the value of the data is really useful. And I know that when I was working in public observing systems, whenever a sensor would go down and the people would start calling and saying, where the heck is that wave data or something, that was like really direct value and it's voice of the customer, which is good. I think looking beyond the traditional ocean markets is also important, like going inshore, because we all know that the ocean controls so much more than just the coasts, right? We know it controls the climate, the weather, precipitation, agriculture, food security, all these kinds of things. And I loved Rick Spinrad talking about going to the National Realtor Association and saying, like, do you care about the ocean? And then those saying, well, we care about heat waves and how that affects, where we're selling homes. We're talking about microclimates when we're talking about insulation or air conditioning. And so if National Realtors Association starts understanding the value of ocean observing, that's a big win. The other, of course, and Michelle and IMOS have done this so well, is talk about how the ocean can help insurance companies think about insured and uninsured losses. And if you go to lenders or investors of really large developments, that have billions of dollars under assets and are thinking about when, do we site something near the shore? Do we add insulation to our, big communities that we're developing? What do we need to do for roofing technologies? And then you can help them understand how climate is changing, which is completely driven by the oceans. There's huge amounts of value there. So it really does span the entire communication realm and the economic analysis and communication of that, to go from the fisher person all the way down to the groups that are managing, $1 billion of assets. And I think, and Julie, maybe, I don't know if put you on the spot, but this is where Jupiter is playing a place, right? Is trying to communicate the economic value and of making better decisions in a changing climate, which again is driven by oceans.
Thanks, Eric. Julie, do you want to respond to that with respect to what Jupiter was doing?
Yeah, so Jupiter is a climate risk analytics platform started about 5 years ago. I helped lead products for that company before I went into investing. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's actually a really burgeoning space. There's so many companies now operating in that area, and lots of use cases around financial services. As Eric points out, that includes banks as well as insurance companies.
Excellent, thank you. Tatiana, you're last on this question, and then we're going to take a break and bring more folks in.
Thank you, Chris. I actually just wanted to sort of make mention of the fact that we're developing a research program at Economist Impact through the World Ocean Initiative. In fact, NOAA and OFI are engaged and involved on this around the value of the digital ocean. So looking at ocean observation streams, how they can help us understand climate patterns better, and in effect, really just think about the sort of how we can basically unleash how we can effectively, through greater data accessibility and usability, and understanding the economic linkages, inform and drive the blue economy, and help bolster the case for improved and expanded ocean observations. Because it seems to me as though I do think that we do need to understand this value better in order to encourage deeper investments into this and improve usability for a wider set of users outside of the current ecosystem.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to draw this second session to a close, and we're going to take a quick break before we continue. After the break, and actually during the break, we're going to bring all of our audience participants into this conversation so that everyone's here together. If anybody has a question for the group, please use the raise hand feature and I'll call on you. It's going to be a large audience, about 70 people once we come back from break, so I probably won't be able to get to everyone, but I will start us off with one targeted question, and then we'll see where the discussion goes. So we'll see you probably 2 minutes after the hour. All right, folks, welcome back. So as folks start to trickle back in, I just wanted to thank everyone for the fantastic discussion so far, both in the main discussion, but also the questions and dialogue being layered into the Q&A. This is incredibly rich and it's great, and I'm really happy that folks are so engaged. This session here is open for anyone to ask a question or raise a point. But I want to take a little bit of the moderator's prerogative here and ask just one targeted question, recognizing that our aim here is to uncover targeted recommendations. So what are discrete recommendations that can help to accelerate the creation of essential products and services within the ocean observing enterprise, and that do so at a scale and level of maturity that enables long-term sustainability? Rob.
I would, one of the points I think I'd raise in this sphere is standardization of data formats. I know that the offshore wind industry is doing some fairly pioneering work in standardizing the wind resource assessment data, that they utilize that. They have a vested interest in doing it, in that standardization makes it more efficient for them to actually process the data. But I think standardization of data formats covers a whole sphere of the kind of observation programs that are in place. In fisheries, there's need for standardization in the way in which VMS data is implemented, for example. Regional fishery management organizations each do it their own way. And that makes it really hard for people to sort of take in that data and then make use out of that data. We've talked a bit about data accessibility from the outset. And there's data is more accessible if everybody knows the format it's going to be in, and it's in a standardized format that people can easily access and utilize. It also comes down to data quality. The data is only as good as the quality of the data. If you try to add value to data and it's poor data, you're just going to create poor value-added products. So initiatives like Quartod that focus on standardizing data QA/QC protocols, they're also very important in this sphere as well.
Thanks, Rob. Joe.
And just to elaborate on what Rob was saying, I guess on the kind of satellite atmospheric side, NOAA applies a lightning mapper, I guess that went up in 2016. And the lack of, I guess, lightning data standards has kind of limited its adoption. So, I mean, if government really wants to see kind of the return on investment for different observing platforms, I mean, making sure there are standard data formats or interoperable data formats. And I think they call that the FAIR doctrine, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and I guess repeatable. Making sure it fits that data, I guess, standard is very helpful.
Thanks, Joe. Christina, I saw you had a question earlier. You're welcome to jump into if you want to ask that after Kelly. Kelly, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, standardization, accessibility, quality, those are all fantastic fundamentals, but I think we need to go beyond that, right? In a lot of parts of the ocean community, we've done that. I mean, for a lot of the meteorological and oceanographic data that I used to work with, it is standardized, it is accessible, it is quality controlled. In fact, all of the regional associations are now certified, and those are all elements of IU certification. So I think it goes beyond that a little more to really understanding, like, what are the user needs? I mean, it comes back to a conversation we had earlier in this session, but it's sort of that chicken and egg, making the investment in the data products that industry needs versus really understanding what those industry needs are. And so you have to have those collaborative conversations with potential users, come to the table maybe with a sketch of your idea and not a complete, build it and they will come approach. but get that feedback and work in an iterative process to make sure that you're really meeting the needs. And I know that may not be discreet enough for you, Chris, but I think that's one of the real challenges in making those connections and really accelerating the data product creation.
Thanks, Kelly. No, that's good. Bill and then Caroline.
Thank you, Chris. So Bill Stobbe with the World Ocean Council. I'm actually just started running their Smart Oceans, Smart Industries initiative, which is basically connecting commercial vessels of opportunity with researchers in order to crowdsource effectively ocean and atmospheric data. The point I want to make is quite simple. You really need to have industry involved with this discussion, because they're already out there. They're the commercial shipping companies, they're the cruise lines, they are the fishing industry, et cetera, et cetera. They can be persuaded basically to donate their services and their assets effectively to gather more ocean and atmospheric data and share it, quite frankly. And that's what my job is basically with the Smart Ocean, Smart Industries program.
Thank you. Christina, do you still have a question you want to ask?
Yes, it's mostly some comments and maybe questions as well. But I work for the U.S. Coast Guard Office of Search and Rescue, and this is an important topic for us, since the development of new wind farms of the coast of the East Coast will modify the winds and the currents. And so we use those to search and rescue people lost at sea. So if the currents and the winds are changed and we cannot quantify them and qualify them, then we'll be looking in the wrong place. So I come from a user perspective of data and models, atmospheric and ocean models. So I find this conversation really interesting, because I think there has to be a partnership between industry, the government, and academia as well, because they're doing the research that will allow us to keep using those ocean and atmospheric forecast models to see, to do our probability maps, to go and search in the right places. But there is, as people mentioned before, there is not enough funding for them to do that. And we don't have funding for those things. We just don't have that. So I'm not sure, where this funding can come from for academics to be able to modify their models and incorporate wind farms so the forecasts are correct. But obviously the data that comes from IUS is very important as well. There are models that take some of the observations and do forecasts as well. So that's one area. We were in the our Coast Guard Search and Rescue were at the UK to do a search and rescue exercise with the Coast Guard there, and the industry was Ørsted specifically. It was incredibly helpful and collaborative. We trained them how to drop our buoys. They dropped the buoys. They gave us all the data we needed. So I think that was extremely important, that data sharing and the collection, data sharing, and integration of all that data is very important. So those are just comments, but I just, I agree with several people. Where do we get the funding? How do we get this sort of going so that industry and the government can benefit from it? So that's.
Thank you. Thanks, Christina. So we'll go with Caroline and then Edwin and then Pierre.
Thanks. I'm actually, it was a comment that Kelly made about sort of having lots of standards already in place for things like meteorological data and that side of things. And we work with a lot of, it's primarily port customers capturing data. And we've worked with particular ones who wanted to capture data so that they could feed it into things like the GLOS sea level system. And the requirements for the standardization, the right thing to do to have that level of standardization meant that they had to install an extra systems over what they needed for their basic day-to-day needs, which then increased the cost of their projects quite considerably. And when they're a commercial operator, they're going to say, well, maybe I just won't bother with the whole sending the data, making it available to a GLOS standard. I'm just going to capture it for my operational procedures, which is good enough to get my ships in and out. But then the wider community doesn't benefit from that data capture. And I don't quite know how you change that, because I think, to me, standards are really, really important, but it's how we make sure that we can get the industries who are capturing these data sets as well, being able to feed their data to make it more widely available.
Good point. Edwin, and then Pierre.
Okay, actually it's Glenn, and I'm the board chair of Cape Fear Ocean Labs in Wilmington, North Carolina. And our focus is being an advanced prototyping center for physical and digital products for deployment. We're really interested in all the scientific research and scientific innovation, but our hard focus is on the deployment of those technologies. And right now, offshore wind is off the shore of North Carolina. There are a lot of things going on to get that started and stuff. But the other thing in my background is I spent 12 years in the Washington State Legislature, and a couple of observations on the commentaries around money and getting the attention span. And the first thing you have to realize about elected officials, everybody's coming to them for money. So what makes you stand out, and how do you keep it simple? When you're really thinking about it, as has been mentioned, it's a situation where you've got 99% of the people have no idea of what all of us love, which was mentioned earlier. And my joke is when people say blue economy and blue technology or geotechnology, in particular, 99% of people will say, when you say blue economy, they say beer, shrimp, and a view. Everything that's out of sight over the horizon that's going on, they have no context for. And that translates to their elected officials. When you go into an elected person's office, all the data that you provide is all good stuff, but that is for staff. That is to make sure that it's in the public record and accessible to others. For an elected official, you do have to make it one page simple and as close to localized as possible. The example giving it the local fishing boat captain. That is what's going to get them engaged, and having those people. They're not, I hate to say this, but it's just true. They're not interested in solving your problem for funding. They're interested in solving their problem on getting reelected, and does helping you add to that equation. So the more fishing charter captains you get, or the better. And it's very challenging. It's very frustrating. It's very long-term. It's not something where you're in, it's a one-off, and then you sort of stand back to see what happens. It is a permanent investment of your time to educate not only who is in office, but the staff that is supporting them, and making sure that you know them as well as you know the elected official. And one of the things to do, and this just sort of in the black arts, before you go into a legislative person, go through their campaign finance. Who in blue industry is already giving them money, and then go to those people and talk to them. Because the first thing that's going to happen when an elected official here's your pitch about we need funding for this, and it's a great thing, it's going to help you, they're going to call whoever that blue industry person is who's given them money to see if it makes sense. So cultivating those people is a particularly productive thing. There is one challenge in the communications of the blue sciences and that's definitions and terms. There are a lot of common overlapping terms. There's blue economy, there's blue tech, there's climate tech. To the greatest degree possible, standardizing, consolidating, narrowing that terminology so that elected official doesn't become confused. And then the last thing is where there is a very clear problem statement. And the discussion earlier, the observation with the US Coast Guard and search and rescue in wind fields is a big deal. And we've actually looked into that at some depth, because what the need there is for essentially an elevator switch. So when air and sea assets are moving through a wind field, they do so safely themselves. And there's a big gap there. And where you can sort of quantify that, the likelihood of funding significantly improves, because it's a clear problem statement. That doesn't mean there aren't a lot of interests that have a finger in that, but like I said, as an ex-legislator, the data, unfortunately, is not enough to carry the day. It's about how the data applies to that elected official and their calculus about problem solving so they look good. And that's the most, and one page is about all you get to do that. So with that, I'll shut up.
No, good points, Glenn. Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Per Fitzek. I'm with Kongsberg Maritime as well, and supported these dialogues and very fruitful discussion. Thank you all. I think what is very important, Chris, is your last point on what are the concrete recommendations. And I especially feel that this topic that we touched upon today, compared to the others we had in the other dialogues, is that it would highly benefit from an ongoing, open and honest exchange between the different sectors, especially targeting like how and where does collaboration fit in to realizing that value chain from the data collection to the actual service provision. Because I sense that this specific task of generating the service is a little bit more blurred and overlapping between the different roles. So the question should truly be, for example, which areas would the public sector identify in which they would like to see industrial support, or where the industry representative says, okay, this is the area where I would like to see more support from the scientific side. And I think that is absolutely essential. So basically get very clear on who is going to play which role in that chain, because some moments in today's discussion revealed that there is a big overlap and that we are not clear yet which is the most successful path. Like, where does the public contribution start, where does it end, and where does the industrial contribution start? And identifying these interfaces seem to hold a lot of potential for better efficiency gains. And also, like, from the stakeholder side, what information do you want? What information is it worth it? And then see which roles are going to be played by whom, in order to leverage this efficiency. That seems to be very important in a continued exchange on such a topic. Thank you.
Those are great points, Pierre. Thank you. We've got a few minutes left. Do we have any final comments or points anybody wants to raise? Well, if not, Caroline.
Yeah, the only one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I did a poll in our office about what does ocean observation mean, and it was 50-50 as to whether that meant everything offshore or whether that included the coastal domain as well. And obviously, we know that it covers everything in the marine space, which is fine, and everybody on this call knows that. But what if the rest of the industry sectors don't realize that, and they look at something like people talking about ocean observations and they think, well, that's something way offshore that doesn't involve me, even though I've got something that maybe is hydrological, riverine, coastal based. So if we don't address that issue, and there may be a good way of getting more industry and more players involved in the sector to increase the sector and increase the economy of the sector. If we can sort of maybe using ocean observations, I don't want to say it's the wrong words, but it's how do we make sure that people realize that applies to them as well?
That's a great observation. Joe.
And yeah, just to add to that, when we were developing that economic statistical account, it was originally called the Ocean Economy Satellite Account, but we talked to people, we went through some branding, and we realized, like I said, marine kind of conveys also that coastal component. And people think of the offshore ocean if you say ocean. So yeah, maybe marine observations might be the better term. I don't know.
Good point, Joe. Well, I want to thank everybody for your engagement and contributions and participation today, both in the discussion, in the chat, in the Q&A. This was incredibly rich and very valuable, I feel. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. I look forward to seeing some of you and continuing the conversation in our 4th dialogue on January 10th. And I will pass it over to Liz to discuss next steps and to close today's conversation.
Thank you, Chris. Just wanted to add to your remarks that these dialogues indeed take a team to pull together. So I wanted to thank my colleagues listed here in the slide that I believe is before you right now. We hope you will consider attending our final dialogue on January 10th. And with that, thank you for your time and have a lovely day.
Thanks a lot.